Welcome back, folks. Today we are going through our Dynasty sells as we approach this off season, and there could be a massive amount of reasons for each one of these players on the list. Some that I think have reached peak value, and you could potentially get the best haul possible for them today. Others might just be guys I don't like their production, their prospect profile, or their future potential output, and I'm telling you to move off them for that reason. All that being considered, if this is your first time here, please drop a subscribe on the channel, drop a like on this video, and comment some of your Dynasty sells as we dive into the first player on this list. I know it's going to sound like a crazy one, and you're going to think I am off my rocker, but it is Trey McBride. And I saw a statistic today that was so interesting. Through 15 weeks, the gap between tight end 1, which is Trey McBride, and tight end 2, which is Travis Kelce, is greater than the gap of tight end 2, again, which is Travis Kelce, to tight end 33, which is currently Noah Fant. So obviously, if you drafted Trey McBride this year, you are thrilled about it. If you own him in Dynasty, especially if it's a tight end premium league like the one I'm displaying on this screen, you are thrilled about it. However, when we talk about timing the player sale and getting peak returns for them, I do believe you will be seeing that out of Trey McBride this offseason. And that's not to say that I think Trey McBride couldn't score a similar range of points again in the future. I just mean you have the perfect amalgamation right now in combination of his age, the situation in Arizona, the quarterback he got to play with for most of this year, Marvin Harrison Jr. being injured and having no true alpha to compete with in that wide receiver room, James Conner getting hurt, and Trey Benson getting hurt, and just all of these things combining into a perfect storm where Trey McBride is the number one option on that team by a country mile and is playing like it. In his previous seasons, as you guys remember, the most amount of touchdowns he had accumulated in a single year was 3. This year, he's currently at 10. Now, I'm not saying that it was impossible for Trey McBride to get double-digit touchdowns again. In fact, he probably deserves them. He is that good. I'm just saying that this is an outlier from the norm as of what you've seen so far, and you can blame it on Kyler Murray. Sure, I have no issue with that. I'm not a big Kyler guy. But regardless, I think the level of production you're getting out of Trey McBride this year, combined with signing a fresh deal in the offseason this last year and being 26 years old, probably at the peak of his career, this might be the highest value you ever see on Trey McBride. And so if you could tear off Trey McBride to Kyle Pitts and get 2 first-round picks kicked back to you in return, which I think a lot of people would do in tight end premium leagues today, that could be an interesting process move for someone who's kind of stuck in the middle and really wants to add some more firepower to their roster. However, if you have Trey McBride and you're riding him on a championship roster, I'm not telling you to sell him just for fun. I'm just saying you've probably reached peak value on Trey McBride, and if you feel confident enough in the rest of your squad to move off from him and get a haul, this is the biggest haul you could probably get. Now, the next guy on this list is on the opposite end of the spectrum of Trey McBride, a guy that I've never been a fan of and am still not a fan of for fantasy football. Now, in real life, he's a ton of fun. You got to feel for him after the injuries and obviously the gunshot wounds that he's sustained. But in fantasy football, this man cannot stay on the field. Not only can he not stay on the field, he was an extremely old wide receiver prospect. And being a September birthday, he's going to be 26 years old before the next NFL season kicks off. He's still on his rookie deal. He has yet to stay healthy and put together a full season, giving you any kind of consistent fantasy performance, currently sitting at wide receiver 76 and having another knee injury and ankle injury here that he's dealing with going into the end of this season. He's never even cracked the top 70 of finishes, and I know he's only put one season down and he was coming back, but he's not going to do it again this year. At this point, he's going to turn 26, like I mentioned, already aging out from a dynasty perspective on where his peak value could be. I would be taking almost anything I could get for Ricky Pearsall at this point in dynasty fantasy football. If that's a late second, give it to me. If it's a guy that I'm higher on, like Devin Neal and a couple of thirds, I would take that as well. Personally, this is not a guy I want on my roster. I don't think that there's any more value spikes coming his way, and I would be comfortably shopping him around. Now, the next guy on this list is a bit polarizing, and I find myself somewhere in the middle here. We're talking about Jameson Williams, currently sitting at wide receiver 12 at only 24 years old, just signing an extension with Detroit this offseason. A lot of people were worried about the Detroit Lions with Ben Johnson leaving. I think it's safe to say those concerns were unwarranted, and that the Lions offense is still giving you plenty of consistent fantasy production through Jared Goff, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta when he's healthy, David Montgomery still being a top 30 back. There's plenty of guys on this list. Regardless, my real reasoning for selling JMO is not actually that I don't like him as a player. Loved his prospect profile coming out of Alabama. Drafted him myself in a ton of rookie drafts that year, around the 104, 105, 106, even swinging early on him because I thought he had that much upside. The reason I'm telling you that I think he's a sell is because I do believe that this might be similar to how we were talking about Trey McBride, some of the peak value that Jameson Williams is going to see. Let's say he continues the run that he's on right now, which is phenomenal, averaging over 7 targets a game since Dan Campbell took over play calling again, putting up double-digit finishes consistently, most of the time booming for over 20 points. This guy has looked explosive. He's looked incredible. And on top of that, he's so young. And that being said, we still have Amon-Ra St. Brown there, who I think is still the true alpha and will remain as the alpha in this offense for the next 3 to 4 years. On top of that, you've got Jahmyr Gibbs, who's eaten a ton of fantasy production as well. Now, Sam Laporta has been injured, and Isaac Tesla is a guy that they loved in the draft. In fact, Dan Campbell even did what he needed to do to move around picks and trade up to get him. Now, I'm not saying that Isaac Tesla is the ultimate threat to Jameson Williams. I'm just saying you've already seen it this year. They want to get him involved in the game plan. If Sam Laporta is also healthy, I think that's just another mouth to feed. The point is I think you're going to have plenty of good production from JMO moving forward. In fact, he could finish as a top 25 guy for the next several years. I just always feel with Jameson Williams, whether it's the crowded room and the boom-bust quality of his play, you are never going to feel fully comfortable placing Jameson Williams into your lineup and expecting a consistent points per game out of him. And for that reason alone, I think that this could be the peak value for Jameson Williams. Meaning, if I could use Jameson Williams to tier up to a Garrett Wilson at the beginning of this offseason, I would be doing that immediately. I just prefer a guy that has more consistent target volume in a PPR format to give me a floor of the amount of targets I can expect out of him. And I know recently you've been seeing a lot more targets out of JMO. 10, 9, 9 in the last 3 weeks. But before that, we had 3, 7, 7, 6, but then 2, a 1, a 3, a 4. You're never going to see Garrett Wilson with numbers like that. And so I think if you can add a second or 2 seconds, or potentially even a guy like a Jalen Warren in a third to Jameson Williams to tier up to Garrett Wilson, which a lot of people might not think is as big of a tier up as it was this last offseason, I would be exploring that opportunity. And that's a move I feel comfortable making. Now, the next guy we're going to do, as it seems like I'm picking on the Detroit Lions, we're not. I am going to pull up David Montgomery here. And at currently running back 23 right now, and being 28 years old, turning 29 this offseason, he is regressing. Not a ton, and it's not terrible. His touchdown numbers are actually still quite good. He's had 8 this season. There's a good chance he still finishes with double-digit touchdown numbers, as there's still 3 games remaining in the season here. And that'll probably put him as a pretty similar finish as last year, running back 20. What you have seen, though, is the snap percentage has gone significantly down this year. He is, hovering around that 35% on average, and Jahmyr Gibbs is taking more of the opportunity than he has before. And on top of that, I just see the direction of this team moving a lot more through Gibbs, St. Brown, Jameson Williams in his increased role like we just mentioned, Sam Laporta, and potentially starting to think about the younger wave here than continuing to give David Montgomery the level of production that you would need out of the value that you're drafting him or holding him at. Obviously, being over 28 years old already as a running back, he's starting to hit his value decline on the dynasty market. But I think he's still a premium handcuff to own. And if you could be flipping David Montgomery for a few seconds, or potentially, a player that I like a bit more with some upside like a Zach Charbonnet, I would be doing it. I just think that you'll get a little bit more runway on a younger player like him that is the similar range of production and has upside to still be a starter in his career versus a guy who is probably beyond his starting days. The next guy we have is also a running back. This is a guy that tons of people were super excited about in the offseason, and quite frankly, everything went the way that people were hoping. If you were a Jordan Mason owner, you wanted Aaron Jones to miss time so he had the chance to step up. You wanted J.J. McCarthy to potentially struggle, so they had to lean on the run game, and even Carson Wentz come in and take over for a bit so that you have to lean on the run game even more. The game script went perfectly for Jordan Mason, yet he's barely going to crack a top 32 spot, sitting at RB32. Now, they gave him a 2-year deal, which they can definitely get out of this offseason and potentially even void, so he might not even be on the Vikings next year. And additionally, he's going to be a 27-year-old running back that's never shown you true production at a high level, never cracked the top 30. And I just think Jordan Mason at this point is going to be a journeyman backup running back that, occasionally might get some production here and there when other guys go down to injuries. But I just don't see any future upside for him on my dynasty roster unless I'm an ultimate contender and I'm just housing a ton of handcuffs, hoping that they'll give me some flex play in the future. I am comfortably seeing what I can do to move off Jordan Mason. Now, I don't think anyone's going to give you a lot for him. I think he's going to be an add-in piece on a trade. But again, if you could ever sweeten a deal with a Jordan Mason as a part of your tier up, I would not be hesitant to throw him in that package. If there's anybody left in your leagues that are interested in him, I'd be shopping him around and seeing if I can get a second, see if I can get a few thirds or equivalent value, or like I said, use him in a tier up trade to get somewhere else, because Jordan Mason is not a guy that I believe in for the long term. Speaking of guys I don't believe in for the long term, and was super down on all offseason, thought he was a huge camp hype machine, never expected real production out of him, and have to take my victory lap on this one. JCM, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, a guy that I thought never really had the true prospect profile to be a breakout candidate, obviously going in the 7th round, being so over age at age 24 as a running back, already approaching that running back age cliff, 27, 28 on his very first deal without even signing a second one on a Washington Commanders offense that wasn't very efficient at running the ball last year and is still not efficient at running the ball this year. Obviously, they're going to go through a massive overhaul this offseason, figure out how they want to build a new structure around Jaden Daniels and progress for the future, as they're one of the oldest rosters. In fact, they are the oldest roster in the NFL. Too many question marks for me with this guy. And obviously, if you were one of the lucky ones that took my advice or some of the other creators' advice out there and flipped him for what I saw sometimes first-round picks right before the season or after week 1 or week 3, then you are sitting on top of a mountain right now, kicking back with your beer and laughing, because this man, to me, is worth less than a second-round pick. So I'd be taking 2/3 for JCM and re-rolling. I would be taking Theo Johnson. I'd be taking Dalton Schultz. I'd be taking anyone that's going to give me actual production on my dynasty roster, and I am not looking back. So if there's anyone in your league that still wants to roll the dice on JCM, let's send some offers. The next one, sticking in Washington here, is Deebo Samuel, a guy that I honestly also never really liked, but has given you consistent wide receiver 2 production this year, sitting at wide receiver 23. And I know at times he's probably won you some matchups. He's given you those wide receiver 2 flex numbers that you were looking for. But at age 29, and I think his best years being behind him, consistently aging out, he's nothing more than an upside flex play in Dynasty. And those aren't guys that I love holding on to on my roster. In fact, in my Dynasty buy video that I posted yesterday, if you want to go take a look at it, a guy in Deebo's range that I far prefer is Chris Godwin. And I know a lot of people are going to say Chris Godwin's been so hurt, he's been injured, he's in a crowded room in Tampa Bay. I disagree. I think he's been a much more consistent producer for you over the years. He has a more carved out, consistent role in that Tampa Bay offense. and he has rapport with Baker Mayfield. And I don't know if Jaden Daniels and Deebo Samuel have truly built that. If we remember correctly, that exists with Terry McLaurin. And if Terry McLaurin hadn't been injured all season, I really doubt that you're getting a top 30 season out of Deebo Samuel. And if Terry McLaurin can come back and put together a healthy season next year, with especially whoever they add in the draft, and Luke McCaffrey actually looking pretty encouraging at times this year, so they have some young guys waiting in the wings. Deebo Samuel is a guy that's just going to lose massive amounts of dynasty value this offseason, in my opinion. So if you can still get a second for Deebo, I would be doing it. Again, if you can flip him for some guys I like in the middle range of upside wide receivers, maybe even like a Wan'Dale Robinson, I'd be thrilled. I'd be thrilled to go for something like that. Okay, the next guy is a bit more polarizing here, and we're going to be talking about Adonai Mitchell. And I know a lot of people really liked him when he landed on the Colts. They loved his prospect profile. I wasn't as big of a fan coming out of Texas as some others were, and I thought the landing spot was not a good fit. Now, that ended up being true. He didn't fit in the Colts. They end up sending him away as part of the Sauce Gardner trade, and he ends up in the New York Jets. Now, this is the real key here. He's had some flashes, right? A 26-point week and again 17 this last week. There has been no Garrett Wilson. There has been no consistent quarterback play. The Jets are a complete and utter tear-down dumpster fire. For me, I think these spike weeks, the 26 and 17, has opened up a buy window for you potentially if you are in somewhere in the middle or a contending roster. And you can go over to a rebuilding team or someone that's on the lower middle half of your bracket and sell them on the fact that Adonai Mitchell has future upside as a young up-and-coming prospect for the New York Jets. I think you smash, accept, and do this deal. Because while he still might have some fantasy relevance in the next couple of years, I think the Jets are such a project team that you are going to be sitting around and waiting until he is 25, he's 23, if you're going to sit around and wait until he's 25 years old to potentially carve out a wide receiver 2 role on the Jets behind Garrett Wilson, obviously, and a guy like Mason Taylor, who I really like. And that's not saying that the Jets don't go out and draft other receivers in the next 2 years with all the extra first-round picks, second-round picks, and capital they've been accumulating throughout this teardown by sending away Williams, sending away Sauce. Like, these guys are ready to retool this roster, and you don't think that they're going to bring in talented skill position players as a part of that? I personally think that Adonai Mitchell's upside is probably a wide receiver 3 over time, and if somebody else is willing to sit with him on the roster and wait for that to accumulate, I'm happy to take production now and turn my head the other way. So, again, if you're a contending roster and you can use AD Mitchell to tier up to someone in that range like I had talked about before, like a Chris Godwin, like a Michael Pittman, maybe this offseason when his value dips significantly with no Daniel Jones potentially coming back for the start of next year. Even a guy flipping him over to Josh Downs, who I still think has a lot more upside. Can I add a second-round pick to Adonai Mitchell and go get Josh Downs in a third? I'd feel a bit better about that, especially if it's a late second and you're more contending and this is really just a drop down of 3 to 4 picks. I'd explore a deal like that. That's just my 2 cents. But I do know a lot of people are still very high on AD Mitchell and will probably try to sell you otherwise. The next one I have on this list is a guy that I use as a punching bag all the time, Jerry Jeudy. I've never been a believer. I never will be. He still has not cracked the top 50 this year at wide receiver 51. The only reason he even got an inflated wide receiver 12 finish last year was because famous Jameis came in and fed him the rock, and his stats became incredibly inflated because of it. In a season this year where he had no real competition outside of Harold Fannin on this offense, he's still been unable to crack the top 50. He's starting to enter that age 27 region where I've just never seen anything good enough from Jerry Jeudy to invest real capital in him. If you can use him in a tier-up trade, if you can throw him in a package deal, if you can even get a little bit of picks to re-roll back for him, late second, a couple of thirds, I would gladly be taking anything like that for Jerry Jeudy. And quite frankly, I think one of my favorite things to do with players like this is what I just talked about with the other trade example, a small tier-up trade. Like if I'm sitting with an early third-round pick, maybe the 302, can I move to the 211 by just including Jerry Jeudy? Like I will gladly take a swing to move up 4 or 5 picks just by using Jerry Jeudy. That's how little I view his value. Now, finally, the last two guys I'm going to mention here are really, not big fantasy pieces, but I just like to print extra liquidity going into the offseason here, potentially give myself assets that are going to rise in value, which even if they're third and fourth round picks, they will. As you approach the draft, they always go up in value. Next guy is Parker Washington, who's had a nice little spark here. At only 23 years old, he's actually looked relevant and fantasy relevant at times this season. Wide receiver 43 for Jacksonville. And I know they have Travis Hunter and Brian Thomas Jr. and now Jacoby Myers, who's played really well, could be re-signed in Jacksonville and wouldn't surprise me at all. But I think Parker Washington is just part of a crowded room that really is only going to see the opportunities arise for him to be a relevant fantasy player if there's a lion's share of injuries in front of him. And those are guys that I just don't really like to hold. While he's been productive at times, you might be able to use him, again, as a Jerry Jeudy type piece that I just mentioned. Can I throw Parker Washington onto a deal and move up a few picks? I would love to do something like that. So that's a small one for you. The last one is the same thing. A guy who's given you some production this year, mainly due to injuries in Green Bay, between Christian Watson and Jaden Reed and Matthew Golden at times and Tucker Kraft going down. Now we got Romeo Doubs sitting at wide receiver 37. He is going into a contract year, I believe, this year, so I think he's going to potentially sign somewhere else. Could mean a nice little value spike for him in Dynasty if you want to hold him for a second until he potentially signs with another team and some good buzz goes around him. He's a guy that I see as a serviceable receiver, and he'll be a good quarterback's friend, help move the sticks, catch some third down passes, and still be a plenty relevant real-life player. And that's not to knock him. You can be productive in real life and still not have a lot of fantasy acumen. And this is just how I view Romeo Doubs. At age 25, he's going to go sign a new contract somewhere, and I just don't see his dynasty value ever really rising to a degree where I think I'm going to get a genuine return on my investment. And at this point, he's a guy that, if you can take a couple of third-round picks that will increase in value in the offseason, even after he signs a deal, or potentially even a late second if he signs a deal somewhere exciting and looks like he's going to have a role, I would take it. I don't think that, these guys are mainly roster cloggers. And, the last thing I will say on this point is just that if you are going to stash your roster with players that could potentially score you fantasy points for the future, I would always do so with handcuffs and backup running backs. Those guys, on a statistical basis, have far more potential to actually be delivering you real fantasy performances that end up making or breaking your weeks than taking swings on these, free agent wide receivers that move around teams and finish somewhere between wide receiver 45 and 70. Because there's so many of them. And that level of production, most of the time even, can be subbed in by a tight end that you can pick up off the waiver wire or acquire for a third or fourth round pick. I mean, a great example, guys. And I've been talking about him all season and was talking to you about him all last season. Dalton Schultz. I don't think I saw a single creator out there telling you to go trade for Dalton Schultz, buy Dalton Schultz, pick up Dalton Schultz. You didn't. Nobody but me. And the only reason I was telling you to do so is because this Texans wide receiver room, Nico Collins, great. Jaden Higgins was going to take time to develop. He's a project, even though he's got a lot of upside. Jalen Noel was never going to come in and be a true alpha and give you real fantasy production. And Dalton Schultz has already, been productive in multiple atmospheres, whether it was Dallas, now it's in Houston, and he's built good rapport with C.J. Stroud. And this guy, in the offseason here, you were picking up for fourth and third round picks. I don't think anybody was denying a third round pick for Dalton Schultz. I watched it happen in 20 of my leagues this year where Dalton Schultz is just getting passed around like a bag of chips. Okay? Now, you're seeing him here sitting at the 147 fantasy points, tight end number 9 on the season here. And quite frankly, you're getting that level of production out of Dalton Schultz. You don't need to stack your roster with guys like Jerry Jeudy and Romeo Doubs. You could make a third-round pick trade for someone to a Dalton Schultz, a David Njoku, a Theo Johnson, someone like that, and get the same level of production just because it's not sexy. Kate Otten, I mean, all these guys are right in that range. So I don't really think holding some of those deeper fringe wide receivers actually helps you. I'd rather just use them to tier up to a new pick, give myself some extra liquidity to play with this offseason, and continue to improve my roster and make trades. Thank you guys so much for coming along today as we whipped through this one. I know it was a lot of information coming at you really fast. If you did enjoy this video, please don't forget to like and comment and subscribe to the channel. Go hop in the Discord for your chance to talk football with me all week long. We are talking season around. We got Dynasty discussion, Dynasty trades. We also do a Dynasty trade show on this channel. So if you want your trades to be reviewed on the show with me and my special guests, please go join the Dynasty Discord. Super easy to do so. You can click the link that's in the bio of this video, or you can go over to my website, www.dynastypricecheck.com, just this username with a .com on the end of it. And if you're looking for more access to me, consider signing up for my Patreon on the Community Hub page so that you can get your rosters broken down by me, have a monthly strategy session and consultation, or simply just go over to the website and get yourself a Dynasty Detox, which will get you a one-on-one consultation with me to break down your entire Dynasty roster and build you a 3-year roadmap for the future of success. Thank you guys so much again for your continued support. I will be seeing you for more trade videos just like this one, buy, sells, Dynasty rankings, more on the way, mock drafts, all the good stuff. Take care, guys, and let's win some fantasy championships in the coming weeks.